Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Shuchi. I'm one of the co-founders of the Chennai Photo Biennale. We are very glad to share with you that this is the third edition that we have still managed to make possible in the middle of the pandemic. So we are quite excited and exhausted both, but it's really been great to be able to do a festival in these times and to bring the artist community together. And a huge thanks to our curatorial team who have worked along with us for a very long time to make this edition possible. The current edition is a hybrid edition that is available now primarily online. For the last 2 months, most of our shows were available also in physical forms with some of the artist works. And all of the artist works continue to remain live on chennaifotobiennale.com. Today, we are very excited to have with us one of our artists from France, Anais Tondeur. Welcome, Anais. And one of our co-curators, Orko Datto. Hi, Orko. Thank you for making it happen today. And I'm just going to quickly introduce Orko for maybe some of you who may or may not know him. Orko Datto aims to probe questions surrounding the image in the digital age while simultaneously playing the role of observer and commentator on critical issues. He pursues narratives on seemingly disparate topics: forced migration, technofascism, surveillance in digital panopticon, disappearing islands, nocturnal realms, and psychosomatic stress of captive animals, to name a few. Apart from working on his visual projects, he also enjoys curating the works of others and has been associated with the Kochi Biennale, Obscura Photography Festival, and of course, the Chennai Photo Biennale in this regard. Welcome to both of you. And I will just quickly request my colleague Priya and also introduce Priya. Sorry. Priya leads our programs management at the foundation and has been amazing in managing the whole Biennale. Priya, if we could just share a little bit of a glimpse into all that has happened over the last few weeks and what's to come. It's a very short video, and then I will hand over to you, Orko, to introduce Anais and take the conversation forward.
Also for us.
Taboo.
So Michael Hanna's work, he also paired each image with
Try it out. I mean, it really looks like. Thank you, Priya. Over to you, Orko.
Thank you so much, Shuchi, for the lovely introduction, and thank you, Priya, for the video as well. And thank you, everyone, for coming here for this artist talk and presentation today. I am one of the curators, as Shuchi mentioned, and our curatorial for this edition of the Chennai Photo Biennale is titled Maps of Disquiet. And Maps of Disquiet reflects on the exigencies of our time. So essentially, we are looking at the resisting majoritarian impositions, ecological collapse, technological dystopias by reclaiming pluralities of thought, voices and art, and building new networks of solidarity and care. In a gist, there's a lot that we have been going on through the last 2 months, and we encourage you to go through the website where the majority of the Biennale is resting right now. And today it is our great delight and joy to have with us Anais Tondeur, a French artist who is part of the Biennale. And we invite her today to share her work and present her engaging projects with us. To give an introduction to Anais, this is what her bio says. In an approach rooted in ecological thought, Anais develops an interdisciplinary practice through which she seeks for a new form of political art. Working with photographs, videos, plant gathering, distillations, or installation making, she creates speculative narratives and engages on investigations through which she experiments with other modes of relation to the earth, the air, the ocean, or the plants. Trained at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design and at the Royal College of Art in London, she is the recipient of Ars Electronica honorary mention. She has also presented and exhibited her work in various international institutions, such as the Centre Pompidou in Paris, Serpentine's Gallery in London, Beaux-Arts Brussels, Venice Biennale French Pavilion, Infinite Spaces, Science Gallery Bangalore, Namjoon Paik Art Center. We are very pleased to have Anais with us, presenting her work Carbon Black as part of the Chennai Biennale. And I would like to pass the stage over to Anais to present her work, and then we'll take it on from there and have a discussion going. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Arko. Thank you, Shushi and Priya, for making this event possible and the Biennale possible as well. And actually, it's been almost 1 year now that we're in the discussion, Arko, on this project that we imagine under many different forms. And it's really nice to see all our capacities of resilience to adapt and keep making work in this strange context. Maybe I could start by just introducing the Carbon Black protocol, and before that introducing my practice, and then we can look in detail into the protocol. But to start, maybe because all this is just so virtual, I would propose that we engage briefly in a small physical experiment, a breathing experiment, because all that we're going to speak about is our relation with the air, with this atmospheric surrounding around us. So if you're happy with this, we can just for 1 minute really focus on our breathing. Just make sure that you feel really rooted. Like if you were standing, your feet would be parallel, but if you want to stay, just feel really rooted into the ground and welcome the air that enters through your nostril. Really accompany the air just down into your belly. And I mean, most of the time when we close our eyes, we feel this better. So really welcome the air inside of you and really take it down into your belly. And then next inspiration, you can really take the air all the way down to the tip of your toes. So maybe we can do like 2 breathing like this. And in the next breathing, maybe start to feel as if you were a plant that is not only breathing through the nostril, through the nose, but also you can feel how you interact with your surrounding also through the whole body. So as if you were breathing through the whole parts of your skin, the whole part of your body, really feeling the air coming in and coming out. We're not the inhabitants of the earth. We live in the atmosphere, likes to say the French philosopher, Italian philosopher, Emanuele Coccia. We're not the inhabitants of the earth, but also we live in the atmosphere. And this is really much what I would like to explore with you today in this moment together. Try to sense this intertwinement, this intermingling of our bodies, our existence to the world. And for this, I will tell you 2 stories. One, which is about the expedition on the trail of this set of carbon black particles. on which I engaged to create the first series of the carbon black photograph. And this story will be itself punctuated by the fragments of another story at another time scale, a story that is focusing on our relationship between human and fire. And I'll grow this part of this discussion on the thought that have been developed by an English anthropologist, Mark Higgins, with who I've been working for the past years, and we wrote an article together specifically on this question. So as I will be quoting Mark Higgins several times, I may just introduce you from where he's based. So he's actually working in a lab, in an anthropological lab in Grenoble. It's called Cresson. And as part of this lab, there is an interdisciplinary endeavor called Sensibilia, which is about looking at the place of the senses in the understanding of the contemporary context that is the Anthropocene. And he works in particular on the question of the air, of the atmosphere, and how this medium is made manifest through specific practices and technologies, and how these transform experiences and serve to assemble a politics around which air is made a matter of concern. And just to give you the context of the way we met, we actually met for the first time in the lab of Tim Ingold, this fantastic anthropologist in Aberdeen, in a big project called Knowing from the Inside. So it's really much in this interdisciplinary trying to explore all the sensitive mean to encounter and reflect about our relation to the world. And this reflects really much the way I develop my own practice, which is in encounters with different contexts, different forms of knowledge and construction of our understanding of the world. And through these encounters, through these transversal encounters, I give form to fictions, to speculative stories, to participative protocol of investigation, and each are based as experiences through which I explore other conditions of being to the world. And as Arco was saying, using the forms of installation, photographs, videos, drawings. And I like to say that I develop each project as a form of laboratory of attention, of laboratory of perception, within which to invent, test, embody those other way of inhabiting the earth, of cohabiting with others of the living. And actually, I prepared a few images to share with you. So so now you should be able to see some visual, is that right? Can you see something?
No, Anais, you can't.
No, okay. Like here, you should be able to see something.
Yeah, now we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I will just give you a few example of it's just always okay, perfect. A few examples of other practice and projects I've developed, which are always developed as an encounter also with a place through modes of investigation. So here you can see this project, which I started in 2014, which is composed as a series of walk along major tectonic faults, tectonic fractures, as a mean of trying to encounter this thing which is unreachable and perceptible, which is this geologic time, this geologic dynamics. Since 2011, I'm also working with plants from the exclusion zone in Chernobyl, recording their photographic imprints on photosensitive paper. So working with the plants, with those plants that are growing in the irradiated soils of Chernobyl. Also working around other type of soils, polluted soils, more closer to where I live, actually in Paris and in the suburb. And here I develop another protocol with another anthropologist called Germain Meulemans. And here it's also a participative project where we invite inhabitants to search for a specific smell, which is the smell of the soil after the rain. It's called the petrichor. And this becomes a pretext to turn our attention to soils in urban environments where we've almost forgotten the existence of the soils. And so we go through long walks, collect soils through a kind of situationist protocol, and then back in the studio, transform in almost like an alchemic lab. We hydrodistillate those soils, not so much to actually reproduce the petrichor, but to develop a sensitive experience through which we can get closer to the richness, the multiplicity, and the essence itself of the soil. And like, for example, here it's presented in an ethereal way, so through a synesthetic experience. I've also developed a longer investigation under the surface of Paris in a 2 years investigation with geotechnicians who are responsible for the solidity of the foundation of Paris. And this question, the question of the investigation was really much to shift and interrogate our perception of the soil, usually as a solid, when in fact we had rather in front of fluids. So it's a lot of experiences and fiction like this that invite to shift our perception of the world in a mode of control, to go back into the fluidity of this world and to go back with and amongst these others of the living and those other cycles of the earth. And as a last example, actually, when I cannot reach myself, my site of expedition, I collaborate. And here I collaborated with the NASA, who were sending a probe to space, and there's a little bit of space in the probe to bring into the depth of space an art piece. And just a few weeks before, I discovered I was walking in the archives of a fantastic astronomer. Camille Flammarion was a highly prolific astronomer who, for the whole of his career, has been trying to push further the borders of the known, speculating on habitable worlds, or even working around spiritism question. And as I was walking in his observatory, I found a small little book with a red cover, and inside of it he had started to note his dream, to write his dream as he was, like, from his 14 years old, he started to note dreams. And I thought that was a fantastic opportunity to give homage to all his work and all his quest to push forward this limit of the known. And so I sent 3 pages of his dream book into space, and now these pages of the dream are traveling in the immensity of space. And what I like is to think that when you move into space, you go back into time as well. And so at one moment, the NASA probe with the dreams will pass the moment where Camille Flammarion was doing his dream. So it's a lot of projects like this that are forming this form of a laboratory of perception, of fiction, to try to question our relation to the world, trying to tell new ways of thinking, developing new ways of telling the world and our relation to it. Each time trying to rethink all modes of perception. And I'm really close to some words of the philosopher Bernard Stiegler, who is proposing a kind of combination between the words thinking, in French, penser. So it's about thinking our relation to the world, and at the same time, penser in French, it's written P-A-N-S-E-R, which means to take care. So through thinking our relation to the world, it's also trying to take care of what we inherit from the past and carry forward into the future, so as to sustain our being in the world. And now, if you want, we can here we can focus into and dive into the carbon black project. So this project, as you may have perceived from this breathing experiment at the beginning, is really much an invitation to explore our human relation to the air, our human relation to the atmosphere, to the sky, which would not be or is no more an object of contemplation, an element of the landscape, or the background of our earthborn lives, but from one breathing to the next, the milieu, the environment from which all lives depend. And the air we breathe is shared actually with the rest of the world. This is our first common good, yet its universal presence dissolves our vigilance and excludes it from our current concern. Yet, as Mark Higgins highlights, this transparency is misleading. And if we look at some of the matter contained in this REO milieu, like particulate matter, which is at the focus of interest, particulate matter such as carbon black. So maybe we need to look at what is carbon black. It's a product of the semi-combustion of hydrocarbons, so emitted through, like it's one of the emissions from vehicles, for example, all type of vehicles, from car to really large transport, merchandise transport boat. And these particulate matter are extremely small. It's of the scale of the micron. It's less than 1 micron. So it means that it can really travel over the world. It knows no geographic borders, which can actually participate in the rising of the sea level, because, for example, you would find a lot of those carbon black particles at the surface of the ice in the Arctic, which create a black thin layer, which attract the sun rays, which participate in melting the ice and indirectly into the rise of the sea level. So it has an impact globally, the scale of the Earth, but it has an impact inside our bodies, because it's so small that it goes just through the skin, and no borders between the inside and the outside of our bodies. And actually, this carbon matter connects us back to the history of our relation to fire, to combustion. And this story has been accelerated by human species in our way of life, in all our diversity. And it's totally connected to our capacity to transform the matter of the world. Some interpretation of a paleontological record suggests that even hominids may have started playing with fire 1.9 million years ago, notably through the practice of extensive burnings, as it's still the case, for example, in Australia, which accelerate the natural cycles of forest fires, with far-reaching consequences for floral and wildlife around the world. But at the same time, fire is connected to the stove or earth. I don't know how you say, what's the right word for this, the stove or kiln, or maybe earth. Do you say that? And they are the first reliable witness of our evolution, the evolution of human, the evolution of this relation between human and fire, or more precisely, the first trace of technology mediating this relationship, which dates back already at 750,000 years. And thus through stove, through earth, humans have domesticated fire by confining it to a circumscribed space. So the fire is then dependent on the human for burning. Fire remains alive as long as actually it is fed. And so thanks to oven or breath or stove, as you name it, fire has become, we could say, hotter. Its metabolic power has been multiplied with some insight. So the advantage offered by kilns are clear. the transformation of otherwise stable earth. We can think about clay, sand, stones that are then transformed into more useful material like ceramics, glass, plaster. But these pyrotechnologies have been responsible, as we can say, for cascading revolution in technology and material culture that have shaped human societies and their living environments. And the first step, well, you know it in this very short story, the first step is that of the engine with internal combustion. It marks obviously the industrial amplification of our relationship with fire and its coupling with fossil fuel. And Mark Higgins like to really focus on this, or to be put into quotation mark, as we all know that industrial revolution was an event. The distribution of its development, its advantage and disadvantage was not, or actually is still not evenly and fairly distributed. And similarly, if we have slowly become aware of the impact of these successive technical revolutions on the carbon of the cycle, on global climatic balances, and now on the very conditions of our survival, the responsibility is not equally shared by all humanity, even if our time has become that of the Anthropocene. So we could say that if a relation with fire, mediated by the development of our pyrotechnologies, has underpinned the extraordinary capacities of human to transform the material and the living world and to transform itself. And societies at the same occasion, we know humans have always transformed their environment in the background, so to speak. So obviously fire allowed us to cook cereal, to extract the nutrients from them, but it also covered all dwellings, or caves, tents, houses. And by what has it been covering those dwellings? Well, by suits. And actually not only our houses, but also our lungs. And even if the photograph here look like an old photograph, it's just a recent of a decade. And you can see on the left a lung of a person that is living in a quite low polluted area. And on the right, it's the lung of a person living in Sydney. So Mark has this strong image of fire having always a shadow. So there is always a shadow in the useful work of fire, a shadow that represents our involuntary immersion in the environment that we are busy transforming, a shadow of which carbon black is emblematic. So this actually gives the ground to the project Carbon Black, which I started in 2017. And I started this protocol in a really small island in Scotland. So as you can see on the map, it's just in the north of Scotland. I wanted to find one of the wildest islands. And as I reached this small reef, I sent my coordinates to two physicists specialized on the atmosphere. Actually, it was part of a collaboration and a residency I was developing at the GRC, which is the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And the role of those scientists is actually to follow and study the flows of pollutants within the atmosphere. And so we imagined this protocol together. So I reached this one of the wildest islands of Europe. And as I arrived there, I sent my geographic coordinates to the physicists who could define where the particulate matter had been emitted. And actually, they'd been produced 1,350 kilometers downwards in the harbour of Folkestone. So as you can see in the south of England at the bottom of the image. And the principle then was to try to make tangible this invisible trajectory And so I engaged into a walk, an expedition, retracing, unraveling the other way around the trajectory that has been followed by this set of particles. So for this, I was wearing a mask through which I was filtering the particulate matter, meeting us. And I sent actually the mask to the physicists at the end of the expedition, and they could extract the particulate matter from the fibers of the mask. So you can see here the 14 fials with different level of carbon black, because the level, although we were sometimes just a few hundred meters away, the level of carbon black in the air really varied. You can see from the first day on Fair Isle, where we are at 2.1 microgram per meter square, meter cube. And the next day, just a few hundred meters away, it's 12 microgram per meter cube. And what I was really interested actually with this possible extraction of the carbon black from the filters was to make the connection with soot, because carbon black and soot are of the same family, as we've just seen. And soot has been used for centuries to create Indian ink. In French, we call it Chinese ink. Well, I think need to do a little research on the exact history of the making of Indian ink. And so this set us into this trajectory of transforming the extracted carbon black particles into an ink. So you can see here a test of ink. And then this ink, we used it to print actually the photograph. Because every day I was just wearing one mask. And at the same time, one of the intent of the day was to realize a portrait of the sky. So I was trying to find a place where I could have an extremely large angle, so to be able to create a composition where most of the space in the image would be destinated, given to the sky, and still on the horizon line, the principle was to get detail, so to be able to contextualize this portrait of sky, this image of the sky, and at the same time to also play with this shift that is at the core of my practice, to leave this overarching position of control of the human on the earth and put back the human at its scale, which is, as you can see here, rather small. So the image that you see on the screen is the first portrait realized on the expedition on the Isle of Fair, and the next day is also on the Isle of Fair, but the level of carbon black has increased. So you can see that the palette of blacks and grays is much higher. And here, even more intense, with this portrait of the sky realized on the North Sea, and then reaching Aberdeen, and really much crossing. So we crossed the whole of Scotland, of North England, to arrive back to Folkestone. Here, Edinburgh, with you can see a detail of the plane and the airport, just on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and the Scottish border, Shibboleth, Newcastle upon Tyne, which is one of the places in England where there's been a lot of coal extraction, and then the suburb of London, Sutton-in-Ashfield, Peterborough. And here we reached London just a few days after the attacks of June 2017. And here this picture was taken from the last floor of the Tate Modern. So you can see just at the bottom of the image the Dome of St. Paul. And finally, we reached Folkestone. So it's really much a protocol that invites to perceive this intermingling of our bodies to the world, or the porosity of our body to the world, but also our constitutional vulnerability to the environment that we are transforming, and actually bringing the background to the fore. So trying to show, in fact, to show this shadow, and through this photographic experiment, to show this porosity of our life to the world, which is usually an experience that we feel we live in a liminal experience. So, for example, under radioactive particles, or here particulate matter. But I can maybe explain a bit further the concept and the intent, but maybe it can be done through a conversation or questions also with maybe also the audience or Arco.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for your presentation, Anais. This was super enlightening for all of us, at least. I think for those who have been able to see your work already on the website, it was great to see the broader thematics that emerge in your work and in your practice in general, and so thank you so much for that. I'll just I'll invite the participants in our program today to write in the question and answer panel section in the bottom, so you can send in your questions there, and we can pick up some of them as and when time permits, and we'd be happy to present them to Anais and hear her thoughts on them. Yeah, so I mean, so before, in anticipation of your questions from the participants, I think just a few words on why, like, what we were very interested in your work, and we really wanted your work to be a part of the Biennale for a multitude of reasons. I think one of the main things that was very important and interesting to us was the fact that in your works you are bringing together. I mean, you mentioned it, but it's throughout your practice, it seems like you're trying to bridge in this idea of the geological time and the historical time that we are living in, and your works kind of situate themselves at the confluence of these two different times that essentially make up the Anthropocene. And what I find really interesting is it seems to us that you are proposing different ways of seeing, essentially, of how to understand the Anthropocene in very interesting ways, through as you mentioned, the idea of the radioactivity, or in this case the particulate matter. These are things that are in a sense what we could call, I mean, what this other English philosopher Timothy Morton calls the hyper objects. They are things that are spread across the world at a planetary scale, and it's things that are, you hear about, but it's very difficult to comprehend at a planetary level, because as humans, I think it's very difficult for us to really make comprehension of such things, of planetary events, planetary objects. And I think through your work, we get a very strong insight into an understanding of these, the hyper objects. And so thank you so much for that. It also brings to mind the idea of, I mean, the Biennale also ended up unfolding, let's say, developing as well as unfolding during the pandemic, during the successive, like, it saw the three waves of the pandemic. And in India, like, the actual Biennale happened during the third wave. It's quite crazy when we put it in those terms. And I just feel there is a strong premonitory aspect to your work, in the sense that, the protocol that's involved in your project involves these objects that are, they know no borders. And the way you're trying to get to them is via the mask, which in the last 2 years has become the sort of very emblematic of the pandemic, like trying to make sense of life, and the air that we live in, the atmosphere that we live in, as you very, very beautifully mentioned, that we are not living on the earth. I mean, we are living on the earth, but we are actually living in the atmosphere. And that very atmosphere constitutes the very breaths we take. And those breaths are the ones that that give us life, yet that's the very same breath that has also been endangering us and puts us at risk due to the pandemic. So, I mean, I think a lot of those things were sort of these different concerns were flowing through our minds when, you know, like your work really spoke to us. And yeah, thank you so much for being part of the Biennale. So
well, thank you for your comment as well. And if I may just also detail, it's indeed trying to create experience or to give to see these timescales that are really beyond our understanding, but also beyond seeing. It's also trying to make tangible, to really make us feel these cycles of the earth that usually we can't even comprehend. And so it's that's why I was speaking about this laboratory of perception or of attention. So trying to create experience, like by most of the time means of photograph, so photographic protocol. So this experience can help us to feel these cycles of the earth, but by this also reinsert the human within the cycles, where the moderns have really much put the human outside of the earth in this kind of position of or this illusion of control and overarching. And what I'm interested is to create all those protocols and all those experiences that bring back the human within and amongst the order of the living. And for this, I even try that the making of the photograph is following the same principle. So really much in the case of carbon black, using this particulate matter, the matter, the aerial matter present in the portrait of the sky, or in the sky, which is being made its portrait, to produce the ink and to make tangible the portrait of the sky. So each time it's this endeavor of really much trying to go back with and amongst these others of the living. And as you were also speaking about the mask, actually now I'm developing a new protocol, still based on the carbon black project, but as we are all using masks, I'm actually making a benefit of it. And the masks that we use are also good for filtering carbon black particles. So now I'm starting to think about creating, collaborative portrait of the sky by collecting all our different masks and extracting the carbon black particles from the mask, and then using the same process. But then, because as we are all using those masks, to turn it into the possibility of another collaborative project.
Sorry, where are you doing this? What's...
Well, no, it's more in thinking about it, and okay. I started to develop this with also the European Commission, but it's also in an experimental stage, and we're discussing about maybe doing a workshop as part of Chennai Photo Biennale, so that could possibly nice. A way of also sharing the protocol with others.
Could you tell us a bit more about the prints that you've made? I mean, I was thinking more in terms of the production, and then how are you thinking of like the dissemination of the work? I mean, we have done one sort of dissemination here, right? With the I mean, unfortunately, we've had to stick to, like a digital presentation. We would have loved to have the actual prints and to be able to see what they look like. So if you could tell us more about the production aspect of your process, as well as the broader philosophical implications of, the materiality of that process and how that materiality fits into your practice on all.
Yeah. Well, so actually it would be nice one day to be able to show here in the context of India, where the prints, because there is something in the encounter with the portrait that obviously is lost through the virtuality, and it's a quite large portrait. It's there like 150 centimeters wide and 100 high, so they're quite large. And the paper that we use is a cotton paper, so it's really matte. And it's actually, so I collaborated with a printmaker to realize those images with this specific ink. So if we look at the technical principle of it, in fact, we have one cartridge of ink per portrait. And this cartridge is composed of pigment ink, within which we've placed the carbon ink. So there is a percentage of both, and actually introducing the carbon ink within the pigment ink kind of fluidify, liquefy the pigment ink. So that's why on the prints, you can feel almost like, I don't know, you say in English, a stamp, this kind of
Presence, I would say,
estampe?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this kind of Japanese calligraphic drawing, working with Indian ink. So there is a flow within the ink that is made particular thanks to the presence of the carbon ink. So now we've planned that those prints would be an edition of 5, according to our calculation of what is possible with this cartridge that has been custom made for those portrait of sky. So there is also a sense of finitude of the possibility of those portraits. But the whole photograph itself invites to this experience about thinking our relation to this aerial milieu, to the atmosphere, which has been, I was also really struck by a work, for example, by Peter Sloterdijk, who take us back to the trenches during the First World War in Ypres, where he speaks about this novel way of making war, which is no more thinking about the enemy as how do you say, just a cible, one person to attack, but the enemy is attacked in its environment. And this has been a new way of making war, but also making war to the earth, to the air that is becoming less and less breathable, to the soil, to the water that are getting so polluted or poisoned that it's sometimes difficult to sustain human life. So it's thinking about really much taking into account this medium, and medium is, we could even say, since Turner or the Impressionists or 20th century artists, medium has been key in art production. Even if we think about the Air of Paris of Duchamp, where the work itself is a sample of air that has been collected Rue Blomet in Paris. So it's trying to making and working and collaborating with the milieus, with the environment, to produce the work, to produce an experience. So really much taking us back to our relation to the milieu and growing the work from this interaction. So that's also a protocol that I'm developing with soils. So printing portrait of soils with the soil that have been depicted. Or now I'm working on a new project, working with salts from tears. So I will be producing salt prints from a human sodium chloride.
Okay. Is that one of the new projects that you're working on?
Yes, well, that's possibly part of a really interesting project that the English artist Martin Oz is developing as a field of exploration that he calls tiny mining. So we could be shifting our extraction from the earth back to our own bodies and actually extract metals from our own bodies, or find resources also within our own bodies. So here I would be developing a project that I sketched, which would be calling, for example, mourning the infinite, where we would be in a mourning of this illusion of the infinity of the resources of the earth, and I will go inside one of the oldest extraction mine to realize a series of portraits from the deepest point of the mine. And this mine is also a silver extraction site. So there I will collect a bit of salt that I will combine to a collection of teardrops that I've been collecting for the past years. And then combining the silver of the earth and those human tears to create a photograph as a kind of mausoleum or mourning of this illusion, of this form of infinite, of the resources of the earth.
All the best with that. That sounds super interesting.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Sure,
Yes.
yeah, please do.
Yeah. Have you worked with maybe students or other people as a form of building like these workshops before? I think it would be so interesting. But like wherever you have traveled and maybe you have collected these samples, have you also tried to work maybe with the local communities, or has it largely been more of an independent investigation?
Well, I mean, it depends of the project. For Carbon Black, it started as a personal investigation, and now I'm looking at ways to open it up, especially as I was saying that now we all have mass, so we all have the tools to do a possible Carbon Black filtering. But for some other project, they're really developed as a participative investigation, as with the Petrichor project that I was presenting at the beginning. Or actually at the moment, I'm developing an investigation, a geologic investigation with like 250 participants with the intent of creating actually a geologic fiction. So we found quite a mysterious stone, like not too far from Paris, in the south of Paris, close to a river called the Bièvre. And this stone is quite flat, but directed towards the sky. So it could, I mean, first you would think that it is a kind of like a form of menhir or a place of devotion. But I've involved geologists, historians. It's still a mystery. So now, during the next 6 months, we are developing this collective investigation to imagine the possibility of the history of this stone. Not so much to find, the right story, but it's more a pretext to like bring and lead our imaginations within this long history of the earth, and the stone being a starting point for that. So yeah, now I'm definitely in the middle of this collaborative shaping of a story, of a speculation.
And is that going to be called the portrait of the earth? As you have the portrait of the sky.
Yes.
It is going to be like the portrait of the earth.
Yeah, well, actually, I did a whole quite recently a series of investigation of portraits of soils that I called terrachromies. So
right.
Yeah, working with the tints of a palette of soils to bring the chroma to the image through a really analogic process again.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I think we, if there are no more questions, maybe we could wrap up the session. Anyway, the good thing is that the session is recorded. I could see maybe somebody was not able to hear very well, so we will share the link with everyone. Yeah, Orko, any last comments before we close?
I think I'm good. Thank you so much, Anais, for being part of the Biennale.
Yes.
Well, thank you
so much for the presentation today. It was super nice.
Yeah, well, thank you for your invitation. It's delighted to be able to share this experimentation as part of the Biennale.
Yeah, and we hope to have you sometime in India, whenever that might happen.
Wonderful.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Orko.